Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. In the quiet town of Greystone, where everyone's business passed from lips to ears like wildfire, Remy Walters and Caspian Ford had written their names on the winds of love. For 4 long years, they shared whispers under the old sycamore tree at Riverbend, dreaming of a life beyond their struggles. Remy loved Caspian beyond reason, believing he would build a home with her one day. She worked tirelessly, sewing clothes, running errands, and sacrificing her little savings just to support Caspian's shaky business dreams, always believing that when success finally arrived, it would arrive for both of them. The days and nights blended into one another as Remy balanced her small tailoring business with her unwavering support for Caspian. It wasn't uncommon to find her sitting by a flickering lantern deep into the night, her fingers numb from hours of stitching, yet her heart full of hope. She held on to every promise Caspian made, every dream he painted with his smooth words, believing each one without doubt. When he needed money to rent a shop, she gave up the little she had saved for her future. When he felt discouraged, she became his strength, whispering words of encouragement even when her own spirit felt weary. Their love was not the kind that shouted in public squares. It was a quiet, faithful devotion that stood tall even in the face of hardship. Remy believed in him more than she believed in herself. She imagined a life where they would own a small house on the edge of Greystone, where their children would play under the mango tree, and where their nights would be filled with laughter instead of worry. For every setback Caspian faced, Remy offered her unwavering faith, reminding him that storms never lasted forever. She didn't realize then that sometimes the storm wasn't outside. It lived in the hearts of those we trust. The day Remy found out she was pregnant, her heart danced with an innocence only pure love can create. She had dreamed of being a mother for so long, not because she wanted to trap anyone, but because she imagined tiny hands wrapped around her finger, a life born out of love. She stood before Caspian under that same sycamore tree where they had once whispered dreams, her voice trembling with excitement as she told him she was expecting. But instead of joy, she saw something she had never seen in his eyes before, fear mixed with coldness. It wasn't just surprise, it was rejection. Caspian's reaction was swift and brutal. He stepped back as though her words were poison, accusing her of trying to destroy his freedom, of pinning a child on him so he wouldn't move forward in life. He called her desperate, claimed the child wasn't his, and did so loudly enough for the people in the market to turn and listen. That day, beneath the scorching sun and before the crowd that once envied their love, Caspian shredded Remy's dignity piece by piece. The words he used cut deeper than knives, and though her body remained standing, something inside her crumbled beyond repair. The people of Greystone, who had once admired their love story, quickly turned into spectators of her shame. They watched, whispered, and judged, feeding off the drama like vultures circling a wounded animal. Remy walked away from that scene numb, her hands protectively wrapped around her belly, shielding the tiny life inside her from the weight of betrayal. She didn't speak, didn't cry. Her silence screamed louder than anything she could have said. The betrayal wasn't just from Caspian. It was from a town that never really cared. Days later, Greystone was once again buzzing, but this time with a wedding announcement. Caspian, the man who had once traced promises on Remy's palm, had married her closest friend, Indy Brown. Indy, the woman who had shared Remy's secrets, who had laughed with her and held her when she cried, now stood beside Caspian in a grand ceremony attended by all of Greystone's elite. Their smiles were painted, their joy rehearsed, but it was real enough to drive the final nail into Remy's chest. Remy watched from afar, her body heavy with pregnancy, her heart heavier with grief. She stood under the shade of a tree, unnoticed, while the people who once gossiped about her love now gushed over Caspian and Indy's union. No one spared a thought for the girl who had been discarded like yesterday's news, who carried a piece of the man being celebrated. As the music played and the guests danced, Remy walked away quietly, each step heavier than the last, determined to find a way to survive even when love had failed her. She didn't carry hatred in her heart, but the weight of betrayal lingered like a wound that refused to heal. When her sons Bentley and Beckett were born, Remy held them close, tracing the contours of their tiny faces. She named them after resilience and strength, not hope. Every night as they lay asleep beside her on the small bed in their one-room apartment, she whispered promises into the darkness, promises that they would never know the betrayal she had tasted, that they would never beg for love or acceptance. Their existence became her reason to keep breathing, her motivation to rise each day despite the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. Their faces, so undeniably his, were a daily reminder of a love story that had ended before it even began. But in their eyes, Remy saw a chance to rewrite her story, not with Caspian, not with Indy, but with the two lives she had brought into the world. She wiped her tears quietly, knowing that while she had lost everything, she had also gained the only things worth fighting for. And as the days stretched into nights, she worked and prayed, holding on to the belief that one day her twins would rise far beyond the shadows of Greystone. Life in Greystone was never gentle for Remy. She took on any work she could find, cleaning homes, selling fruits by the roadside, and when there was nothing else, sweeping the streets before dawn. Her days began before the sun rose and ended long after darkness had swallowed the sky. She moved like a ghost through the town she once called home, her body aching but her mind sharp with one goal: to provide for her twin boys, Bentley and Beckett. The small one-room apartment they called home barely kept the cold out at night, but it was their sanctuary, the only place where love lived freely without judgment. Remy became familiar with the sting of exhaustion, the weight of survival pressing on her shoulders, and the bitter looks of those who once gossiped about her downfall. The streets whispered her story every time her broom scraped the ground. She had long learned to silence her shame, focusing instead on the two pairs of eyes waiting for her at home, eyes that looked like Caspian's but carried none of his cruelty. Bentley and Beckett grew up in the shadows of struggle, their small hands learning to help their mother long before their time. The sound of their broomsticks brushing against the cracked pavements of Greystone became a rhythm that echoed their reality. Their mornings began with cold water splashed on sleepy faces, followed by long hours of sweeping streets and cleaning gutters, their young frames hunched under the burden of responsibility. They never asked why their childhood was different, why they didn't have toys or warm meals waiting at home. They knew instinctively that their mother carried a sadness heavier than words, and that their effort, no matter how small, could ease her load. The twins became each other's safe space, their bond unshaken by the pitying stares of townspeople. When one grew tired, the other picked up the slack. When their mother's cough echoed through the night, they whispered prayers neither of them knew how to end. Poverty wrapped around them like a second skin, but it never broke them. It only made them stronger, more determined to rewrite the narrative the world had written for them. Marley Walters, Remy's aging mother, lived with them, her body frail and her breath shallow. Her health had been on a slow decline, and every trip to the clinic drained Remy's already thin resources. Yet Marley's gentle voice remained a source of comfort in that tiny apartment, reminding Remy that love did not vanish because of betrayal. Every night, Remy would sit by Marley's bedside, watching her mother sleep, wondering if the sacrifices would ever pay off. She carried the guilt of watching her mother fade away without the comfort she deserved, and the fear that her boys would grow up carrying the scars of poverty and rejection. The days bled into nights without relief, but Remy moved forward like a woman chasing the last thread of light. Marley's presence, though weak, reminded her that she was not alone, that even in the ruins of her dreams, family was still worth everything. And so Remy fought, through illness, fatigue, and the crushing weight of judgment, to keep the fragile threads of her family intact. One scorching afternoon, as the marketplace buzzed with its usual chatter and chaos, fate threw an unexpected scene into motion. Caspian and Indy drove through the narrow, dusty streets in their polished silver SUV, the vehicle gleaming like a crown amid the dirt and sweat of Greystone. They slowed near the market square where Bentley and Beckett, now in their early teens, were bent over, clearing debris from the gutters. Their clothes clung to their bodies, soaked in sweat and stained from hours of labor. Indy's laughter rang out from the passenger seat, cruel and mocking, as she pointed at the twins and made a snide comment about their misery. Caspian's eyes, however, lingered too long, tracing the curve of the boys' jaws, the tilt of their brows, the familiarity etched across their faces like a mirror he couldn't escape. But pride is a stubborn beast, and Caspian quickly looked away, pretending not to recognize the ghosts of his past staring back at him. The SUV rolled on, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a memory that would return to haunt him when it was far too late. The mansion at Maple Street, once filled with laughter and parties, grew quieter with each passing year. Its tall walls, once a symbol of prestige, became a cage where echoes of emptiness lingered. The laughter that once danced through its corridors faded into silence, replaced by the hollow footsteps of two people growing further apart. Caspian and Indy had everything money could buy: sprawling estates, designer clothes, foreign vacations, yet their home remained cold and empty. No amount of wealth could soften the heavy air that filled the mansion. Their longing for a child became a silent torment, gnawing at the corners of their happiness, creeping into their hearts at night when the house fell quiet. What began as an unspoken desire slowly grew into an obsession, clouding every conversation and turning smiles into grimaces. Each anniversary came and went without the sound of a child's laughter. Each guest that visited left whispers of pity behind. And when the lights went out at night, Caspian would stare at the ceiling, wondering why the life he had built felt so hollow, even with riches stacked around him like trophies. Indy spent sleepless nights pacing their marble-floored hallways, whispering prayers, swallowing herbal concoctions, and pleading with doctors who spoke in uncertain tones. She traveled to distant towns, met with spiritualists, and endured rituals in secret rooms, hoping to unlock the door to motherhood. Each failed attempt tightened the knot inside her chest, and with every disappointment, she withdrew further from Caspian. He, on the other hand, buried himself in his businesses, pouring his energy into empire building as though money would fill the void growing inside him. But even in the busiest boardroom, his mind drifted to the quiet of his home, to the empty nursery they had decorated in hopeful anticipation. The walls of that nursery watched them suffer silently, painted in soft pastels, toys arranged neatly but untouched. They had painted the name Sage above the crib once, holding on to a dream they now never spoke of, as if speaking would shatter it completely. The more they tried, the further apart Caspian and Indy drifted. Their arguments grew sharper, cutting deeper than words should. Simple conversations turned into battlefield strategies, with blame thrown like daggers across the marble floors. Friends stopped visiting, unwilling to walk on the fragile ice of their tension. Parties that once painted the nights of Greystone with music and laughter faded into memory, and the once grand mansion felt like a prison built by their own hands. The silence became suffocating, pressing against their chests each night, leaving them gasping for air in the darkness. And yet neither of them dared to speak about that day in the market square, about the boys with Caspian's face cleaning gutters under the scorching sun. The image of those twins lingered in Caspian's mind like a shadow he couldn't outrun, but pride kept him from acknowledging the truth that stared back at him so cruelly that day. Back in Greystone, Remy quietly nursed her mother, teaching Bentley and Beckett the value of perseverance. She kept her head down, her focus sharp, determined to prepare her sons for a future far removed from the life they had been handed. She saved every coin, sacrificing comfort to build a better tomorrow for them. Each evening she sat at the edge of their small bed, tracing their faces with her gaze, seeing not just survival but greatness in their eyes. The town that once whispered about her shame had forgotten her, but she had not forgotten. The memories of betrayal and mockery lingered not as wounds but as fuel, driving her forward with the quiet rage of a mother who refused to let her children drown in the sins of another. She moved silently, watching as her boys grew taller, stronger, wiser, each day one step closer to a life beyond the dusty streets of Greystone. The cracks in Caspian and Indy's marriage widened until the walls finally collapsed. It didn't happen in one day. It was a slow unraveling, like a thread pulled endlessly until the fabric of their relationship fell apart. The arguments that once simmered beneath polite smiles exploded into shouting matches that echoed through the grand mansion. The home they had once built as a testament to their success became a battlefield of bitterness and broken dreams. Caspian's voice grew louder, his patience thinner, and Indy's once charming laughter turned sharp and venomous. Their wealth became meaningless, stacked in piles around them like bricks in a prison wall. No amount of money could fill the silence stacked between them after every fight. No luxury could soften the edges of the regret that now lived in their eyes. They had built an empire, but the foundation was cracked and the walls were crumbling. Nights turned into endless rehearsals of blame, each accusing the other of stealing the happiness they once chased together. What had started as companionship had become a contest of who could hurt the other more, and their mansion, once filled with parties and laughter, had become a graveyard of dead affection. One stormy evening, after years of growing resentment, Caspian reached his limit. The rain pounded against the windows, lightning illuminating the cold marble floors of their mansion. Their final argument was not louder than the others, but something in Caspian broke beyond repair. His voice trembled, not from rage but from exhaustion, the kind that burrows into your bones and leaves you hollow. He told Indy to leave, to pack her things and never return. His words carried the weight of years wasted, love lost, and a home that had become unrecognizable. Indy didn't fight back. She walked away without turning, her footsteps echoing through the empty hallways that had once been filled with music and laughter. She took nothing with her but the ghosts of a life that had never belonged to her. The door slammed shut behind her, and with it, Caspian felt something inside him collapse. A strange mixture of relief and despair, knowing he was finally alone, but also realizing too late that the loneliness he feared had arrived long ago. Alone in the vastness of his mansion, Caspian's thoughts returned to the two boys on Greystone's streets. He saw their faces in every corner of his empty home, reflections of a past he had buried under pride and ambition. He began to ask questions, tracing old acquaintances, seeking whispers about Remy and her twins. What he discovered shattered him more than the absence of a child in his life. He learned that Remy had not only survived but had left Greystone without a word. No one knew exactly where she had gone, only that she had disappeared with her sons and her aging mother. The more he searched, the heavier his regret grew, settling over him like an anchor he could not shake. His wealth began to lose its meaning, the weight of gold and properties unable to silence the growing emptiness in his chest. He began to see that he had spent years building walls so tall that he had locked himself out of his own happiness. Remy and her sons had long left Greystone. Quietly, without noise or farewell, they had packed their belongings and moved to Azura Heights, a thriving city where fortunes were made and lives reinvented. Marley Walters had gone with them, her health now cared for, with the wealth the twins had begun to amass. Caspian spent sleepless nights haunted by the faces he had once turned away from. His wealth felt like ash in his mouth, his mansion colder than a grave. And somewhere deep inside, regret became heavier than all the gold he possessed. He walked the hallways of his empty home like a man haunted, hearing laughter that no longer existed, chasing shadows that slipped through his fingers like sand. And with every passing day, the realization grew clearer. He had lost something far more precious than wealth or status. He had lost the only family that had ever truly belonged to him. Azura Heights sparkled beneath the city lights, a far cry from the dusty streets of Greystone. It was a city of endless possibilities where dreams were crafted in boardrooms and fortunes changed hands over midnight meetings. It was here, amidst the towering glass buildings and ceaseless rhythm of ambition, that Bentley and Beckett carved their place in the world. They had arrived with nothing but the determination passed down from their mother, Remy, and the quiet resilience inherited from the battles she fought in silence. Together, they built Carter Logistics Limited, a company that rapidly became one of the most successful in the region. Their hands, once blistered from sweeping streets, now signed contracts worth millions. Their childhood of scarcity had taught them how to build empires without forgetting the weight of hunger and humiliation. In every boardroom they entered, they carried not just their own ambition, but the memory of a mother who had fought the world for them. They walked through Azura Heights not as the street boys of yesterday, but as kings who had crafted their thrones out of dust and sweat. Remy now lived in a grand estate on the outskirts of Azura Heights, a place surrounded by carefully tended gardens and quiet serenity. The house was nothing like the one-room apartment in Greystone. It breathed peace and comfort, the kind she had once believed was beyond her reach. Marley's health had improved significantly, the wrinkles on her face softer, her laughter lighter. Each evening they gathered in the wide living room, sharing stories and meals without the weight of past burdens. Remy no longer woke up to the sound of her boys sweeping streets or coughing quietly to hide their hunger. She watched Bentley and Beckett grow into men of integrity and strength, and though the scars of their past lingered, they wore them with pride, a testament to how far they had come. The silence that used to hover like a shadow had been replaced by peace, the kind that only comes when battles are over, and the victors sit at the table they once cleaned. One rainy evening, a lone figure stood at the gates of their mansion, his shoulders hunched, his clothes clinging to his frame. Caspian, aged and hollow, had traced their journey to this new life. He stood drenched, humbled and broken, waiting to be seen by the very people he once discarded like trash. Time had not been kind to him. His once sharp features had softened with grief, his eyes dulled by years of regret. He had come not as a wealthy businessman, but as a man stripped bare by his own choices, desperate to rewrite a story that had long ago reached its ending. Behind those gates stood everything he had once thrown away, a family, a chance, a life. The security man at the gate recognized his name but not his face. He barely resembled the man whose wealth once echoed through the streets of Greystone. When the gates finally opened, he was ushered in without fanfare. The path leading to the mansion felt longer than any road he had walked, each step heavier than the last. Remy stood in the grand hallway, Bentley and Beckett beside her, their expressions unreadable. Caspian's voice trembled as he spoke, confessing his sins, begging for forgiveness, and pleading for a place in their lives. His words fell heavy in the air, met with silence that spoke louder than any accusation. For the first time in years, Caspian stood before the family he had denied, stripped of pride, wealth, and every illusion he had once clung to. The warmth he once mocked now stood before him in full bloom, but he knew deep down that no apology could bridge the distance created by years of betrayal. The silence in the mansion was deafening. Remy listened to Caspian's words without interruption, her face calm but distant. Bentley and Beckett stood like pillars beside her, the very image of strength and success Caspian had once dreamed for himself. The chandelier above cast a soft glow over them, illuminating the faces of a family he had long ago discarded. The air felt heavier with every word Caspian spoke, each sentence a confession, a plea wrapped in regret. Yet nothing he said seemed to shift the stillness in the room. Time stretched thin between them, each second reminding him of how far apart they had grown. It wasn't anger he saw in Remy's eyes, but something far more chilling, emptiness, as though the bridge he hoped to rebuild had already turned to dust. She stood there, poised, powerful, unrecognizable from the woman he had once humiliated. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became to him that he was too late, far too late. When Caspian finished speaking, Remy stepped forward, her voice steady but cold. She reminded him of the days when she stood in the rain, begging for love, of the nights when her son swept streets while he built empires with another. She told him that the door he had shut could never be reopened. Her words were not sharp, they did not need to be. They fell like stones, each one heavier than the last. She spoke not to hurt him, but to finally close a chapter that had long needed to be ended. Caspian felt their weight, the truth of them sinking deeper than any insult ever could. Bentley and Beckett remained silent, their eyes fixed on the man who had once turned his back on them. Their silence wasn't cruel, it was final. It told Caspian that the place he once held in their lives had long been buried, and there were no pieces left for him to gather. Caspian's tears fell freely, but the twins said nothing. Their silence spoke louder than any words. Security escorted him gently to the gates, leaving him standing outside the life he could never touch. The rain had begun again, soft at first, then heavier, drenching him as he stood there rooted in place. He watched the mansion's grand doors close slowly, not out of cruelty, but as a final chapter to a story he had written with betrayal and pride. The weight of everything he had lost settled on his shoulders, heavier than the rain that soaked through his clothes. His footsteps felt heavier with each step he took away from the house, each one carrying the burden of mistakes that could never be undone. The mansion doors closed slowly behind him, and Caspian walked away under the rain, knowing he had lost something that no amount of money could ever buy. The echoes of the life he could have had followed him down the driveway, fading with each step until there was nothing left but the sound of the storm. He had spent years chasing wealth, believing it would fill the void he had created. But as he walked away from the family he had abandoned, he finally understood that some things once broken could never be repaired. He had built empires, gathered riches, and tasted success, but standing outside in the cold rain, stripped of everything, Caspian realized he was poorer than he had ever been. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.